Ask the Podcast Coach for April 1st, 2023.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's Saturday morning. It means it's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. Jim is out on special assignment, so from EpicCreative.com, it's the one and only, it's the mayor of McFuzzville or something. Fuzz Martin, how are you, buddy?
I am doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me on, Dave, and thanks for not being able to be on, Jim. I appreciate I appreciate your seat. Thanks for having me on.
If you missed it, how many moons ago were you doing Good Morning Podcasters?
So I started on November 1st of 2022, and I bought it while I was drunk on October 31st, 2022, and then I finished on February 28th. So it's been about a little over a month since I have not been doing Good Morning Podcasters.
So I think lesson number one, maybe not buy a podcast when you're drunk. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I would say that. Yes. That would be my first advice for podcasters is don't do it drunk.
Yes.
Don't buy it drunk. You can podcast drunk if you want.
Yeah, I've seen many of those where the drunk cast and things like that. But speaking of drinking, Fuzz came prepared. He actually he doesn't have the mug, but he has a mug. And
I've got a University of Wisconsin lacrosse mug. That's where I paid thousands of dollars for my daughter to go to school. And I stopped at Starbucks on the way so I could do.
There we go.
This. Yeah.
And of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co, because they see you before they hear you, and you want to look good. And the beautiful thing about podcastbranding.co is the fact that Mark is a podcaster. So that whole it's a radio show, kind of like for the internet. Yeah, you have to have that conversation. Mark knows exactly what it is. In fact, Mark's going to go over and listen to your show. He's going to check out your website because he really wants to make sure that your brand is just it's like butter for your eyes, basically. So that everything just rolls together and that you don't have this happy, upbeat, music for the grieving cast or something of that nature. And you're not going to get that from a guy on Fiverr. So, and also if you need a website, if you need a PDF, whatever you need, if you need something to look good, you want to go check out Mark over at podcastbranding.co because, it's the place to go. We can answer the question where he goes, what is he saying? It's cappuccino, take me home.
Oh, okay.
Cappuccino. Or maybe frappuccino, something chino.
Yeah.
But and also we want to thank Dan over at Based on a True Story podcast. And the thing I want to say here is I always say your podcast is a recipe, not a statue. And he recently kind of juggled a little bit of his format. And now he's looking at a time stamp like, hey, this week in April, and then he'll say, oh, this happened, and this happened, and this is how it was covered in the movies. And so you learn about multiple movies in one episode. It's he does a really good job. It's kind of a narrative style thing. Check it out over at Based on a True Story podcast.com. And that does it for all the housekeeping that we start off. We were talking this morning. I said, if I was coaching myself, I would say, don't do so many ads at the beginning of the show, but we get them over with and then, we hop on. So we got people in the chat room. Of course, if you want to jump in, you can ask your questions live, or you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join and hop right in. And if you're like, is this Fuzz Martin guy? How many years are you in radio?
So I was in radio for 15 years. I started off at a little school station. Then I moved literally into a country station that was called Your Home in the Country, and it was literally a house in the middle of a cornfield in a very small area in southern Wisconsin. And then I was at a station in the Milwaukee market for 11 years. So, and then I quit a dozen years ago and got into advertising, and podcasting is my way of doing the stuff that I love about radio and not having to deal with radio general managers and sales managers and those things. So,
well, one of the things I know they do in radio is an air check. And give me a little behind the scenes of like what is an air check, what do they point out? What do they, is it a waste of time?
Yeah. So an air check is essentially a way of evaluating how your show is going and finding out your strengths, finding out some of your crutches and things that you say too often. If you say a lot, those kind of things. What a program director at a radio station, so the person that's in charge of determining what goes on the air and helping to grow that talent, they will record your show, just the parts of you speaking usually at a time that you don't know they're recording. And then they'll come back and sit down with you and say, okay, it's time to go through your air check. And they'll have it all written out by time code and say, here, you do this a lot, or you could have improved by doing this, or don't, take a jingle into a commercial, those kind of things. So so an air check is really a way of listening to a talent's show and then telling them what they could do to improve. And it can happen with podcasting easily, especially easily because it's always recorded. So,
well, can you remember anything that you've actually learned from sitting through one of those?
One of the big things I think that I took away when I was early on, while I was getting my feet under me on the air and becoming a personality instead of just a disc jockey, was my program director said, you sound like you're talking to your, hey, all you people out there, and you there in Radioland. And he said, your radio and podcasting in this case is an intimate medium where you're speaking to a person in their car. Maybe they're out at the gym, maybe they're on a walk, wherever they may be, they're in their office. To them, you're speaking to them one-to-one. And to yourself, yes, you're broadcasting, but he encouraged me to print off a photo of what our ideal audience member looks like, or our, not ideal, but like who our audience was. A country radio is typically a mom in a minivan with, 2 or 3 kids. So I had a stock photo of a mom with 3 kids taped to the monitor on the broadcast console, and that's who I was speaking to every day. So if I started to get a little edgy, I knew the line was, is she going to have to cover her kids' ears? And also, if I started talking about stuff that maybe as a, at that time, a, late 20s male, is that connecting with that mom in the car? Right. So, and that was something that I got out of an air check. And I really encourage anybody who's in podcasting to consider doing something similar. Who is your audience? Who are you talking to? Put that picture up in your studio when you're recording, and try to make it about them or make it for them, not necessarily just for you.
Yeah, I remember I've read a couple different. There was a great podcast for a while about like the behind the scenes story of Oprah, and she called her avatar Susie Homemaker. And so they were trying to get her to compete. This is back in the days of Phil Donahue, and then Geraldo came on and had KKK members throwing chairs at each other and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, we need to be more like these guys. And she's like, nope, Susie Homemaker doesn't care about the KKK. And it was just kind of cool that everybody was trying to, kind of like now with Facebook and Twitter, everybody's like trying to, TikTok's trying to look like Instagram, and Instagram's trying to, it's like, and Oprah's like, no, I'm just going to, like, I know who my audience is. I'm going to give them what they want. And it seemed to work out okay for her, basically.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, I saw a question in Facebook, and this person said, I have over 100 episodes. So first of all, congratulations on that. And I'm starting to think the problem is me. I published over 100 episodes of my podcast in the last 3 years, and I'm still struggling to break 75 plays on Spotify. Well, there's one little issue there that we'll talk about. I think it's about time to start accepting 2 things. My show probably doesn't have market appeal, and the market is currently overly saturated with people making comedy podcasts. Anyone feel me on this? What should I do to improve? I can only think to buy advertising to get the word out. So that's one person. We have. I see this a lot in podcasting. So the first thing that jumped out at me, if you're only checking your stats on Spotify, either A, you're now in Anchor / what is it now, Spotify for podcasters,
yes, correct.
And you haven't submitted your show anyplace else. So that would be problem number one, because that's a question I get in support a lot is, hey, my case, I work for Libsyn, and they're like, I see the numbers, but is that just from whatever, Apple, or is it just from my website or whatever? And it's like, no matter who your host is, we'll go with the norm that they're IAB certified. But if somebody listens to a minute of your show on anything, whether it's an iPad, an iPhone, a website, whatever, it's going to be counted in your media host. So when I see Spotify only, I was like, that's, because I have one show that does really well in Spotify, for whatever reason. This show does meh in Spotify. The School of Podcasting is horrendous in Spotify, but other shows do great. So I don't know if it's, I hear that Spotify might have a younger demographic, but that would be that. But so they've got the other thing again, it's great that you have 100 episodes out, and it's been 3 years, so that's cool. But I think the thing that a lot of people don't ponder, I think this is it. I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to get ads. So what is the why of my podcast? And really, I know you help your wife with a podcast. Like, what's her why?
Yeah, her why is to help teachers. So teachers have limited resources. She is a technology coach. So what she does is helps teachers in her district come up with creative ways to teach lessons, usually using technology. So she finds free tools that teachers can use, and then she talks about them on the air. So her audience is essentially K-12 teachers, and her topics are always free tools. No tools are paid. They may have paid versions, but they always have a free version, and that's what we focus on. 1 to 3 tools each week. They're usually grouped in kind of a theme. So that's what she's focused on, and that's so we know who her niche is, and we know who to get this message out in front of. And it's not a broad appeal show. It's really focused on that group. So it becomes easier to market that because we know who we're talking to and we know where to find them.
Is the idea to just kind of build the community of teachers because, as they say, 2 heads are better than 1. So 2,000 eyes would be much better than 2. Because I know I've had different shows like that where it's like, hey, I found this cool thing, and somebody's like, ooh, that's really cool. Have you ever heard about this? And then somebody else, and so that's very cool. Yeah, my sister-in-law teaches 3rd grade, and if you have a teenager and you're worried about them playing hot dogs and donuts with somebody, what you want to do is take them to a 3rd grade class field trip, because that is the best. That is the best. Birth control.
Oh yeah, yes.
Take them with a bunch of 3rd graders, and nobody won. Oh, it was amazing. But but every year before school, I remember one time she was buying chairs. Like, it's amazing how you think, well, you're fine tax dollars at work, and you're like, no, we need to go buy crayons because they gave us 7 boxes, and we have 20 students or whatever. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
and the tax code says we can only write off $250 that she spent in her classroom.
Yes.
And it's like, well, we definitely spend, not only do we spend probably at least $1,000 a year on different things, but she also buys stuff since we're doing okay. She buys stuff for other teachers, especially younger teachers who are just getting started. And it's so finding a free tool and giving, a lot of teachers are focused on what they're teaching. Not everybody understands the technology. So this helps. So when somebody's searching for, how do I teach about the Titanic is our next episode that we have coming up. And then they can find information, technology-based information on how to teach about the Titanic to their students at any grade level. So
I just watched a fun movie on Amazon, and I'm not a big tinfoil hat guy, but to make a long story short, the company that had the Titanic, the one guy kept wrecking this one boat, and they couldn't get the insurance to pay for it. So according to this lovely conspiracy theory, they swapped the name they took the Titanic and put it on the boat that this guy had been wrecking.
Oh, wow.
And then the Olympus, whatever it was, blah, 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 is actually the boat that sank. And I didn't believe it until in the middle they dropped the name J.P. Morgan. So,
okay.
And I was like, you know what? That sounds, it was, so welcome to Conspiracy Theory Corner.
Yeah, there was also a billionaire at the time, Astoria from the Waldorf Astoria.
Yeah.
He died on the Titanic or whatever ship it was.
Yes.
And
well, they point out there were a lot of people that at the last minute, a lot of people in first class went, yeah, I'm sick. I can't go. So it's interesting. I wish I knew the name of it, but Coach Dave says he has a photo in front of him. He's using that technique to work. This is one of the advantages if you can go to an event where you get to meet somebody who comes up and says, hey, I listened to your show. Because for me, it's Ken Blanchard, it's Kim Craggy. It's, you meet these people and you're like, is that going to resonate with so-and-so? And also, if you do get the chance to meet somebody who listens to your show, be sure to do like a quick focus group. I always ask people, what do you like about the show? So that you can do more of that. But the key is to ask them, what do you wish I would not do? Or is there something that's kind of driving you nuts about the show? And then the key then is to shut up. And what will happen is you have this weird, awkward pause because they don't want to say, I hate it when you do that one jingle thing and I hate the lightning round or whatever it is. But if you give them enough space, they will either come up with something, or if it gets really long and awkward, then you can always say, if you think of something, let me know, because I'm always looking to make the show better. But I have had people say like, that one thing you did, I had somebody say, I wish you would swap out your commercials more frequently on my one show, because I would it's dynamic, but I would like leave it in for the month. And they said, when I binge your show, I keep hearing the same advertisement. I went, that's good feedback.
Yeah, definitely.
Coach Dave says, I spent more than a month developing details for my ideal listener avatar. Refined it over time as I got to know more and interacting with the different listeners. So yeah, that's you can kind of niche yourself out of an audience, but that's usually pretty extreme. Like if I did a show, the example I always talk about is, what if I wanted to do a show about being more confident? All right, who doesn't want to be more confident? But then if I say, well, okay, what about being a more confident parent? Okay, now we just cut out all the people who don't have kids. But what if I said more confident first-time parent? Ooh, now we just cut out, some more people. And if I wanted to go one more level, if I said, what about being a more confident first-time interracial parent? Oh, we just cut out a bunch of people. Yeah. But the people that are left are like, yeah, we need to talk about some stuff. But if I go, what about being a more confident first-time interracial left-handed parent? Okay, now we've niched down to the point where like, no, we've gone too far.
Right,
Don't
exactly.
be crazy.
Exactly. But that is great that Coach Dave is able to do that. And I really think if you can do those kind of focus groups and develop that ideal listener better, I think that's great. And also, it comes down to two things. If I put up a picture, if we're doing a Ask the Podcast Coach and I put up a picture of people that look just like us, do I start excluding audiences as well? So it's really trying to make sure that you're keeping that broad enough and diverse enough as well. Back to your point about speaking with listeners, I recently I do a very hyper local show called 15 Minutes with Fuzz. It's about positive things happening in our community.
Nice.
And that show is like, that's my baby now. After Good Morning Podcasters, that's the one that I focus on the most. But I recently did a listener survey and I created a Google form and said, take this survey. At the end, I'll ask you if you want a sticker, if you want a 15 Minutes with Fuzz sticker, I will send you one. Just give me your address at the end. If not, thank you for your information. And I asked, one of the questions that I get all the time is, why don't you do stuff outside of the area? You could do things all over southeastern Wisconsin and highlight things across the state. And I really want to keep it local, but I wanted to find out if that was, if there was appeal for that. And so I asked that as one of my first questions, and 80% of the people who responded said, keep it local. And so I'm going to keep it local, but it is if had that been everybody wants to hear more from outside, then perhaps I would have expanded that. But that's real easy. If you have a Gmail account, go to Google Drive, you can create a Google form, and then you can ask all those questions that you want. And send your listeners there via a short link, and hopefully you'll get some responses.
Yeah, and I do have the occasional person that's like, hey, I logged into whoever your media host is, and I can't see like what percentage of my audience is male, how old are they, that kind of stuff. You can get that from Spotify. You can also find out who your top audience is, which is weird because when when I went into podcasters, I think it's podcasters.spotify.com, I could see where it was like The Weeknd and like Blake Shelton from the Voice.
Okay, yeah.
I was like, that is an odd mix of, so I have an eclectic audience, but you can't really, because of GDPR, which is this thing in Europe about privacy, legally you can't ask that stuff. So that's where Google for comes into play. If you go to edisonresearch.com and type in like survey questions, Tom Webster, when he worked there, made a whole thing on like how to make a survey.
Great.
Which is really cool. So there's some fun stuff. Ask them. There's just some other things you can do. Like, what was the last product you bought? So you start to see what your audience is buying, and then maybe that's a sponsor. There's all sorts of fun stuff you can do. And then you could also be as simple as, I know Dave asked, but are the shows good that are talking about, I've got 100 episodes in. This is where you can go. The guy, Jack Reicher from the Darknet Diaries was like, what episode did you listen to? Did you listen all the way through? If not, and then it was like, why did you stop? And then on a scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to share this episode with a friend? And if he got a 7 or an 8, he was like, I'm looking for 9s and 10s.
Yeah.
So he just kept going back. So that's just an easy one. That's like, hey, is the show good? Because there's only one way to find out, and that's to ask people, hey, like, did you like the show? And more importantly, would you share this with a friend?
So that's the old Net Promoter Score setup. So when you see a survey that's 1 through 10, would you recommend this show or this product to another user? If that's always the case, if it's anything under 9 or 10, then that's considered you're not a promoter at that point. And so we work with some of our clients here at Epic to do that once a month with a set of their customers, and then we find out why, and then we use that to try to make improvements to their product or their online experience, those kind of things. So,
and I've always heard if you do like a from 1 to 1 whatever number, that you want to use an even number, because like here I'm holding up 5 fingers, and it's really easy for somebody just to grab that middle one and just go all 3s all the way. Whereas if it's 1 through 4, they got to figure out, do they like it a little more or do they not like it a little more based on what they're thinking about. But I think that's the thing that maybe podcasters, I know this is a drum I beat a lot, but I'm not sure podcasters really want feedback on their show. Because I think when they ask for feedback, they're really like, would you please agree with everything I've done to this point?
I need somebody to make me feel whole. Can you please help me feel whole? And that's what your family and friends are for. So, but I think if you want to improve your show, you need to hear the hard stuff and work to make that stuff better. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable changing your workflow, changing the structure of your show, changing the topic of your show and those kind of things. Because if you want to get better and you want to improve, you have to hear what's not good in order to improve that.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for anybody to hear that their baby's ugly or their, the thing that they're pouring themselves into isn't great. In advertising, we get this a lot. I think, between writers and designers. So both are creating, both are, putting stuff out there, but we find that our writers typically take feedback harder than designers, because a designer, you can say, that looks okay, but can you move this pixel here and do this? When you have a writer and you look at their writing and critique that, and it's got a bunch of red marks on it, and they just spent hours writing this, and you hand it back with like essentially saying, here, everything you've created is garbage. They take it a little bit harder. But it does help to improve that. And I think that podcasting is similar to that, in that it's to writing, and that you're creating stuff that's kind of from in here, and then somebody's telling you, yeah, but maybe do it differently. And that could be hard to swallow.
Yeah. A similar question also in Facebook. It says, my show is now 3 years old. It is a live streaming YouTube podcast with over 230 episodes, and now about to start season 11. So they're on season 11, but they're on year 3. I'm trying to do that's like 3 seasons
Yeah.
a year or something. I'm struggling with motivation. Our numbers are okay. We have 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so that's awesome. So things are moving in the right direction. Some people love the show and say change nothing. Plus, there are fans from day one still, which is great. But I feel like it should be growing a lot better. I love that statement because I want to go, why? Why do you think it should be growing a lot better? Has anyone else been through this? Everybody has been through this. How do I go about it? Do I keep working hard and hoping things speed up? So that would be the first thing I would ask them. Like, why do you think it should be growing better? Because I've seen usually the answer to that when I ask that is like, well, there's this one show that they haven't put out an episode in like 5 months. And when I search for that, they come up and my show doesn't such and such. Yeah. And I'm always like, so you're spending a lot of time looking at your competition. And I'm like, maybe you should spend more time interacting with your listeners instead.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
By the way, I figured out how they got to 11 seasons.
Okay.
There are 4 seasons in a year: winter, spring, summer, fall. And so we've had 2 years would be 8, and then we're coming up on the 3rd year. So that's 3. 8 plus 3 is 11. Season 11.
There you go. It goes to 11. Right.
It goes to 11. It's one more.
Yeah. So if this person comes to you, any advice, or where would you start?
I would start by wanting to know who their ideal audience is. Listening to a couple episodes or skimming through to find out what it's all about, and then find out how are you promoting this? What are you just expecting people to show up because you're creating it? Because that doesn't work, and unless you're a celebrity, and unless this person has some celebrity, maybe not. And then also just focusing again what we talked about before. Focus down on who your audience is and engage with them in those places and try to build a community around that. Without seeing their show, I'm not totally certain what advice specifically I'd give to them in terms of like, hey, do this, or, buy an ad here, or whatever that might be. But it's really start with why, and then figure out who.
And then look for the low-hanging fruit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share my screen here, but I'm going to explain what's going on for those that you are listening to the audio, because I'm not going to say the name of the show, but I'm going to show something here in Hindenburg. And so we're looking at this audio, and they've got great audio. It's right up probably around -3, and it's really super thick, and it's them talking over music. And then when the music stops, their audio literally gets cut in half. Like if I were to scroll right. And so when somebody said, hey, I'm trying to take my show to the next level, and I went over and listened to this, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but again, it's the whole recording from the bathroom kind of thing where, your microphone's too far away or whatever it is. And so before you take it to the next level, I remember I was reading an article once on Bill Belichick, who was the coach of the New England Patriots, and this is during the Tom Brady days, and he said they always start off training camp with like how to tackle. And these are professional football players. He's like, nope, we go back to the basics and we cover those things because we kind of assume that everybody knows how to tackle, but hey, let's make sure. And so there is that, your audio level. The one that it really scratches my head. I see this a lot at Libsyn, and I advise these people. I'm like, hey, going back to your why, and usually these are coaches, and I think every coach should have a podcast, and yet they're using the Libsyn podcast page. Now, it's not a horrible page. It's super simple. It's a great place to listen and subscribe, but all your lead magnets and your coaching and everything else that you're selling is on your website. And I'm always amazed when people are not putting their podcast as a blog post. I would just say, look, if you know what a blog is, just think of your podcast like a blog. Copy and paste your episode description and throw on a player. And while you're at it, put a link to Apple, Google, and Spotify on your website. And that's low-hanging fruit that people go, oh, yeah, I never thought, I just thought I had to use this page because it came with my media host or something like that. Can you think of any other low-hanging fruit that you might want to think about?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at, what is the intro to the show? What are your calls to action? All the kind of going through we call it hitting signals, right? So going through, making sure that all all those basics are dialed in. The audio part is great. I think getting the titles of your show right. What do those look like? Are they, episode 1, 2, 3, then the name of the podcast and then some subject that's like way off to the, hidden somewhere, because you've put too many characters in. There's so much work involved if you want to do this right. And it has to become, I have checklists of things that I go down, make sure I got all the, did I create the episode graphics? Did I create a social media sized, 1200 by 630 pixel social sharing graphic for my website? I create templates for all this stuff so it goes quickly, but do I have a transcript? Do I have all these kind of basics after creating good content and after creating a good show and editing it and making all that? There's so much little work that goes into it, but it takes time and it doesn't just happen. Yes, for some people in the world it happens, but that's just like becoming an NFL player. Like there's a little sliver of people, the 4 million active podcasts that will somehow just get noticed without doing all of the important things. And it's likely not going to be you. And if it is, buy a lottery ticket.
Exactly. Yeah. And in that particular show, because I reviewed the show on the podcast rodeo show. And one thing that I see people do on occasion, they do one extreme or the other. When they go to introduce the show, they'd be like, hey, this is Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. And then they'll say something. And then later they're like, oh, and this is Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast. I'm like, okay. And then what she did is she explained who her guest was. Like, hey, they're very similar to what I do, yada, yada, and kind of introduced them. And then she reintroduced the show. So this is Ask the Podcast Coach. And you're like, yeah, we got that. I didn't skip that part. And then and this is one that kind of drives me a little nuts, especially if it's long, reading somebody's LinkedIn bio. Because A, it sounds like you're reading someone's LinkedIn bio, and B, half that stuff doesn't pertain. And so I remember one of the parts of the person's bio was that they were an actress. And I was like, does that really have anything to do with what you're going to talk about today? Because it was kind of I forget what it was, but just thinking that's, the audience doesn't care. That's not like they're going to go, oh, I'm so glad they were an actress. Because if they weren't an actress, I wouldn't be listening. It was really out of left field. So that's, I hear that a lot, or just the double intro where you'll be like, hey, today on the show we have Fuzz Martin. He's a great guy and he's got an advertising background. He's been in radio, blah, blah, blah. Here's my talk with Fuzz Martin. And then when it starts, what do you hear is, hey, we're talking with Fuzz Martin, and then the double intro. So those are just little things that I think a lot of people either don't hear or they're skipping through it. I know for me, it doesn't matter how many times I've pieces parted an episode together. Before I upload that thing, I listen to it one more time. And I swear the 5 times that I haven't is the time I wake up in the morning and somebody's got an email going, do you know you have 30 seconds of nothing in the middle of your show? And you're like, dear. So
I've been there. And regarding the guests on the show, so with my local podcast, it's all interviews. And I tell the person sitting across from me here, I'll say, we're recording the middle of the show. So I'm going to have introduced you. I'll record that over the weekend. So if you don't be startled by the fact that I just get into it, because this is our way. And then we just have a little conversation before we get going, just so they're warmed up.
Yeah.
But I also, and some people don't like this, but I'm not trying to like make news here. I'm just trying to get positive stories out. So I will send a list of questions ahead of time to my interviewee and say, here's essentially the roadmap. I don't want you to write this out. I don't want you to think about it too much, but just tell me if there's anything that I should be asking you that's not on here, or shouldn't be asking you that because it is on here. And I know some people aren't into, like if you're doing an interview, not to provide questions ahead of time. Those aren't I go off the script or off that list depending on their answers. But preparing, I think, is where I'm going with this, and that's one thing that would always come out of air checks as well. Is what does your show prep look like? Did you prep for that guest properly, and how can you tighten it up and make it sound even better to the listener without repeating information and doing that? So prepare, and then go, and then edit.
Yeah, I always give them the topics. Like here's like you said, the roadmap. I've only had one time where somebody asked for the questions, and when I got the answers, it was very, "Hey, Dave, that is a very good question," and they were obviously. But so that's usually why I don't give them the question. But it's only happened once. Usually, I just like, "Hey," and it does help. Here's another one. I had this happen this week. Let the guest know when you've pressed record, because I joined a Zoom call and I did the old "this one's being recording." And he introduced, he's like, "Hey, it's Dave Jack, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like waiting for him to go, to kind of give me a little prep, and we were into it. And it didn't dawn on me till about the third question that I was like, "Oh, we're doing it. This is it." I thought it was just so you might want to let people know when they're officially on the record. Luckily, I didn't say anything horrible or whatever, but I was
Dave Jackson canceled.
What's not a thing, or it won't be a thing in April, and I'm somewhat mad at myself. I'm not mad at the people that made this product, because they took a swing. They took a big swing, and kudos to them. But I was using this app called Volley. It was so cool. And you could send people a text, you could send them audio, you could send them video, you could send them a screen share, and it was free. And I was like, "Ooh, I love this," but I am not a big fan of free. And the reason for that, if I was somewhere where I could pay stuff, I have a list of about 12 podcasting companies that have gone out of business because free is not a good business model. So I interviewed the guy that founded it, and he had started 4 different companies, and they'd all been purchased, and they were all super popular and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I'm going to believe, and I still believe in Josh. I think part of it was the economy and things like that. But off I ran with this thing, and they announced April 30th, "So sorry, but we're closing it." And I looked at it, and I was like, okay, why did this go out of business? And part of it is that they created a really cool app. And they said, "Hey, if you're using this now, everything you're using for free will always be free. And then we're going to create some additional features, and you'll have to buy those." And I was like, cool, great business model, love it. And the stuff that they created that you had to buy, I didn't need. I didn't really need HD video. I can do LD video perfectly fine. And so, and then they came, I'll give them credit. They came up with this cool thing where you could charge people for coaching and this and that. So long story short, if you're using Volley, and if you haven't heard, it's going out of business. I am moving to a thing called Zip Message. I'm assuming I've set up supportthisShow.com/zipmessage. It's basically Volley with a monthly fee. And they're going to be rebranding to Clear something. It's really focused on coaches. But I say this because I was laughing. I was talking about, I put out a newsletter on Friday, and I said, so beware of using free services, said the guy who's using Substack for his newsletter. And I went, I guess they just couldn't monetize it, is what they said. And then the other problem is, normally in a situation like this, you would go and get some VC money and something to keep you floating until things catch on. And I guess right now, if you're looking for VC money, this is not a good time to do it. And so that was sad to see. But if you're using Volley again, well, you better, I was using it. I used the one thing where you could charge people for a thing, monthly challenge.fit, I think is my website. I should know this. And it just dawned on me that all my subscriptions are going to go in April. And I was like, so I might use Patreon or set something else up or whatever. But, this,
by the way, goes back to your point before about having your own website. And that's the thing that I tell people all the time is, if you are relying on, your hosting service website, on your podcast host, and not to say that Libsyn would ever go away or Captivate, that whatever. If you have all of your stuff, all of those eggs in that basket, and something goes away, then you are risking that you're not going to, that's going to disappear. And then you're going to have to go and find everything and put it all back. If you have it on your website and you just simply need to change, who your host is, that's a different piece. And then you get to own that. You can own all the content on there without someday having to move it, and it could not even be going away if somebody, your service decides to increase the prices dramatically, or they take a feature away that you want or something, and you need to move everything, it becomes a pain. So that's why I always will be a proponent of having your own website for that content and that information that you're creating and that you own.
Yeah, I would say it's the main thing, and then your social and everything else kind of floats around that. And I go back to the days of Take Your Pick. If we go way back to mp3.com, that was a website that was too big to fail. And then MySpace was another one. MySpace was huge back in the day, and now it's a footnote on Wikipedia somewhere. And what happens sometimes is I'll see people, and I think this is somewhat universal for most media hosts. When you sign up, you give it a name, and you are given some sort of URL. A lot of times it's just a bunch of numbers or whatever. But that, especially if it's used for your feed, if later you go to change that, and like in Libsyn, where there used to be a slug, and we finally we took away that feature because people were shooting themselves in the foot. Because if you change it, it breaks your feed. It breaks every MP3 file. And that's fairly universal on all media hosts. And that's where, if you want to rebrand, put your show on your website. Don't so much, you want to use your media host for what it's made for, which is, of course, hosting your media. But all the branding and stuff should be on your own website. So,
yep, agreed. And that's like Sounder went away, earlier this year. That was a good example of that happening. And so just make it your own, own it. Back in the day my first podcast was in 2006, and I used to hand code the RSS feed, and that was like copy and paste chunks and all that stuff. And but the thing with it was my RSS feed lived on my website, and I could, if my host went, or if I didn't even have a host, there was files that were on my website, an RSS feed that was on my website, but that was wholly owned, but difficult. And then when we first launched Shanna's website, we were using the Blueberry PowerPress to do that, but all my episodes were stored on Amazon Cloud, on the S3 cloud. It just got to be a lot of work, so moved it away from that. But that's how extreme you could go in terms of owning your stuff. So,
yeah.
By the way, I have to say, Dave, you have a lot of people named Dave that comment and follow you. So I just wanted to
That's it. We're just a big team. You know how they say that like attracts like? Well, I just, a lot of guys named Dave.
Yeah. Welcome, Daves.
It's always fun. But we talked about this earlier, and this is actually happening. I was like, wait, what? Because it's an easy way to fix this problem. This was on Facebook. I think this was in the Buzzsprout group, and it said, I did the unthinkable, and I recorded an episode. You ready for this? While taking a bath. It's no surprising that the audio isn't amazing. There's a lot of echo. I'm new to editing. I'm using GarageBand. Sorry to hear that. And wondering if there's an easy edit to soften the echo. One is Adobe Enhance. If you just search for that, that's actually a pretty cool miracle tool. It kind of deadens the audio a little bit. But the
RX Elements would probably RX Isotope Elements would probably work.
There's that. There is there's one. I forget the name of the company, but it's called Deverberate. That's really good, because a lot of these de-reverb things are made for if you're in a gym, like really long decays, where a lot of times we're looking for this short room noise, and that does that. But the better thing would be don't record in the bathroom. That would.
Well, I think if you're going to record in the bathroom, like there must be a why you're recording in the bathroom, unless it's just I really need to get this episode recorded and I need to take a bath. But if you're going to do that, just own it. I would say make it sound like a bathroom. Own the space. It's like when Pod News is recorded from a trade show floor. Just own the ambiance of that and take it. When you said did the unthinkable, immediately my brain went, this person is recording from a stall in the Atlanta airport bathroom. So.
That would be bad. But I've done that. I remember once I've done a couple different interviews from the floor of an event. And I just say, I'm here in the hallway at Podcast Movement talking to so-and-so. And that way, because what happens, I've seen people that they'll use a noise gate to take out the noise when somebody's not talking. But then when somebody's talking, there's all this murmuring in the background.
Yeah.
It actually sounds worse, where if you just allow it to be kind of a noise floor and then you're talking over it. And I've had people say, wow, I kind of felt like I was there, because you could hear all the stuff that's going on. So
yeah. As long as the signal to noise ratio is
right,
good enough that it's not drowning you out from that, then I think that, again, I would own it. And, you walk into a bathroom with your phone on, people can tell you're in the bathroom. If you're going to podcast with actual recording equipment in a bathroom, people are going to know you're in a bathroom.
Yeah. And right on top of it, of course, Isotope, a great company, is now making a debath plugin. So that will be something that's coming up. And
it's a long April Fool's joke. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Joining us here, his video may not be on, but that's fine. Live from version 3.0 of the Yellow Studio, the one and only Randy Cantrell. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. And I new computer setup, so I'm technically challenged. What can I say?
How's the move?
I look better in audio anyway. Well, that's what I wanted to jump on here and say and bring up, not to hijack the show, but first of all, to thank you and to encourage anybody, as podcasters. I don't know that there's anything still as old school as it is to get an email, because of the trouble that a listener has to go through to send us email. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of my move, and nice to meet you, Fuzz.
Nice to meet
you. To just so Dave sent me an email. I put on one of my shows, Leaning Toward Wisdom, involved in a move. We sold a house that we had lived in for 25 years and had a couple of moves happening at the same time. Anyway, kind of a complex situation to happen late in life. But, Dave took the time, sent me a nice housewarming present. But as important, or more importantly, just encouragement. And I know we're all listening to a lot of podcasts. And when I got his email, I felt a little bit of guilt, because I couldn't tell you the last time I had emailed somebody that I was listening to. And so I don't know. I think encouragement, and I don't mean pats on the back and accolades and that kind of stuff, but just when somebody takes the time to email us, even if it's with some criticality, I don't know, it's a big deal.
It is. And that's where, even if they do give you a pat on the back, they're like, hey, I listened to episode 27. I thought it was great. Obviously you're going to say thanks so much, but also take that time to do, is there anything you'd like me to talk about in the future? Because you've got somebody that's listening, and they might be thinking, has he ever talked about such and such or this and that? So that's always a good way to maybe get ideas for the show. So,
I think also when you interact in that case, you're likely to create a listener that, even if they were critical, that they're going to stick around for a long time, because they feel that extra connection of you're a real authentic person who took the time to respond after they took the time to interact with you. So I think that's very important to respond to every email and whether it's good or bad.
Yeah. How's the move going?
It's insane. I would never advise anybody. Don't sell a house on one day and move the next day, and then on 2 days later close on another house in a different location. Anyway, don't move twice simultaneously. But that's, hey, these are opportunities. I kept telling my wife, I said, this is the price you pay for chasing a dream. So, dreams come through a lot of hard work. I know I heard Fuzz talk about the NFL and stuff, and there's a small percentage where everything just kind of falls into place, but the rest of us, mere mortals, we have to work really hard and all this stuff. So
exactly.
So It's good. I just wanted to say thanks, Dave, and I appreciate everything you do. I love the show. And obviously, I'm a big fan from way back.
Yeah.
I would end on this note. I think it's also important for us as podcasters to surround ourselves. Fuzz talked about, that's what we got friends and family for, to tell us how great we are, even if we're not. But then I think there can be this other circle of people around us. And Dave and Jim are both in my circle in that regard, of people who are willing to tell you the truth, not to be critical and not to be judgmental, but because they've got your back. They want you to do well. They want you to be as good as you can be. And I don't know how big that circle needs to be for anybody else. For me, it's a rather small group, especially in podcasting. But we need these kind of people. We need truth tellers in our life. And I'll leave you guys to the rest of it. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Yep. Nice to meet you, Fuzz.
Nice to meet you as well, Randy. And remember the old adage, measure twice, move once.
Yeah, I forget which podcast movement it was, but I got there, and Steve Stewart from the Podcast Editors Academy, I've known him for years, good friend, and he's like, hey, I want to take you to lunch. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then he said, are you open for feedback? That's number one, a good question to ask, because some people might go, no, I'm happy, but I said, my background's in teaching. I'm always happy to hear something. And he just said, sometimes when you're explaining stuff, the curmudgeon comes out a little more than it used to. And he's like, you got to remember that some of these people are brand new to this. And I'm like, dude, I could leave podcast movement. I haven't even made it to the hotel yet. And I was like, I could go home now and be super happy with that. So it's always good to have good people around. And speaking of good people, this would be a good time to, I think I have cool rocking music for this. Yeah, that'll work. Our awesome supporters, if you would like to be an awesome supporter, go to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And I actually did this morning, and Greg from the Indie Drop-In Podcast Network, if you have, I think it's comedy, true crime, spooky shows, things like that, you can go over to indiedropin.com and actually add your show. You don't have to do anything with your feed, but if you're looking to, get your show in front of a different audience, check out Greg over at indiedropin.com. And, of course, Ask the Podcast Coach runs on Podpage. If you want to try Podpage, go to trypodpage.com, and literally you can make a website for your podcast in about 10 minutes with knowing absolutely zero code for that. And he's not here today, but you can still get your fix of Jim Collison by going over to theaverageguy.tv and check out Home Gadget Geeks. And when you think podcasting, think School of Podcasting. I mentioned earlier about how the Volley app was something I use. When I mean one-on-one consulting, I mean one-on-one consulting, and that can also be via Zoom. So that's something I do because, I love doing it along with the courses and the community over there at schoolofpodcasting.com. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And I don't want to leave the Fuzz man out. So, of course, if you're like, wait, Fuzz, who? What? It's you want to go over to epiccreative.com. So thanks for all our... I didn't
really have a good place to send anybody because I'm not doing Good Morning Podcasters anymore. So,
but aren't you the mayor of something?
I am actually, as of yesterday, I'm officially the president-elect of my village that I live in. I am the only candidate on the ballot, but yesterday at noon was the deadline for official write-in candidates. So I'm the president-elect of the village of Kewaskum, Wisconsin. So
Kewaskum.
Yeah. We've got a lot of Algonquin names around here.
That's fun-filled and exciting.
Yeah.
Let's see here. This is again from Facebook. Hey, I have a question. I recorded a podcast with one friend and my levels were so high, I was so loud. And then I recorded the other night, my levels were very low and my partner levels were super high. And I just don't know what I'm doing wrong. How can I change this during the recording? This is one of those where we always need more information.
Yeah. And I'm guessing also that means they recorded all on one track so that there's no way to increase one without going through and highlighting each section and normalizing them to one another.
Yeah.
So
I had, that is kind of the unforgivable sin in podcasting is if you record, because in theory, a podcast should be like a sine wave. So it's this rolling hills up and down and you see it. But when I open up a file and it's just a wall, this is just this where you've recorded so loud, because it's kind of weird in podcasting. You measure things and 0 is as loud as you want to go. You go up to 0. And if you go over 0, it gets distorted. And I've seen people that just hand me stuff. And while I can take something that's recorded too soft and make it louder and make it listenable, it's hard. Even with, I have RX10 and they have a declip, because technically that's what it's called, you're clipping. And it can make it almost, I had one that was just horrendous. It just sounded like, it was just this distorted thing. Sounded like the guy was talking through a kazoo.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It just was bad. And I was able to kind of take some of that off, but it was still, and so what I did, it was for a client that I edit, and I knew they were going to say, hey, this still sounds bad. And I took a before and after, and I'm like, I did the best I could, but here's a novel idea. And so what I would recommend in situations like that is record something for 30 seconds and everybody says their name or whatever, hit stop and listen to it. And then go, wait a minute. Because I know, like, here we're on StreamYard, and this is kind of one of the problems with the, I don't know, I'm just going to name a bunch. There's Clean Feed, there's Zencaster, Squadcast, Riverside, and many of these do not have, like, StreamYard has 0 in regards to how loud I am. I just look at the Roadcaster, and I'm somewhere near where I normally am, but I have no idea if, and so that's why, in this case, I have, StreamYard recording it, but I also record it on the Roadcaster, and that way if, Fuzz's dog starts barking or whatever, I can mute that channel. And I found this a lot with, if I interview people I know, I'm much more likely to talk over them. I don't know why that is. And so I interviewed Deidre from Cap Show, and I've known her a little bit, and I was editing the interview, and time again, we just couldn't get a rhythm going with who's going to talk now. And so it's really easy to go, oh, I was talking as she was doing, and just mute me. So that's really where if you ever wonder, why does everybody get so excited about separate tracks? It definitely comes in handy, because not everybody can be in a, pristine recording area, and kids and dogs and lawnmowers, and depending on what mic you're using and things like that, it can get to, it's nice to have a second stab at it, which it's hard. Like if Fuzz and I were on the same channel, and let's say I was super bassy, well, if I pull the bass out to make me sound good, well, Fuzz was fine, so now he sounds super thin. So,
and it's either that or you have to go through and highlight every section and do that manually, and then you might as well not do it.
The one that got me was I had somebody who had a headset on, and they kept popping their P's, and I probably asked them like 3 times, can you say happy peanut butter or something? And we kind of got it, and I thought it was okay. And then we started doing it, and I don't know if they were conscious about it at the beginning and they weren't talking as loud, but man, I was like, you know what? I just feel awkward going, can we stop and do this again? But to Puzz's, Puzz. Yeah, Puzz.
Yeah, thank you. I get Buzz. I get, other ones, but yeah, the first Fuzz I've ever received. So,
well, I mean, I want to give you something unique. Fuzz mentioned I had to go into every P, highlight it, go into an equalizer, and say take every ounce of bass out of this, and that would somewhat make it to where it wouldn't jar the fillings out of your teeth when it happened. But it took me hours, because every P, every B, occasionally a K, it was just so, as much as you. It is awkward sometimes to go, nope, move it again, move it again. The 10 to 15 minutes it takes to get the right mic placement will save you hours on the back end. So
it's like a photographer, getting it right in the camera instead of trying to fix it in Photoshop. It's, and there are a lot of good tools that can fix a lot of this stuff now, but get it right to begin with. I totally agree with you. It's better to spend 10 to 15 minutes trying to troubleshoot your technical issue than it is to try to fix bad recordings, for sure.
Yeah, the Coach Dave asked, why not separate track record, then use the multi-track leveler in Auphonic? I have the multi-level thing, which what it's supposed to do is figure out who's talking, and it decides. Not a fan. I've tried that probably 4 times, and it just, I end up going, close, not bad, but So I don't think I've used that in probably a couple of years, because it was a great idea, but for me, I just, and the other problem I have with Auphonic, going back to mic placement, is if you have somebody who's a heavy breather, and either they're too close to the mic, or in some cases, they're just not healthy, which is a thing, and they breathe so loud that when you run it through Auphonic, one of the things it does is it levels out the audio. So when it hears, it thinks it's a word. So all of a sudden, this person, every time they breathe, it's super loud. It's like, oh, holy cow, what's going on? And that is, again, fun, because then you have to go in and highlight the breath and pull it down. And so I always kind of, a lot of times before I run it through, if it's a typical, fairly well-recorded thing, I will run a noise gate to kind of squish down the breathing, and then run it through Auphonic. But yeah, that's...
Now I'm very self-conscious of whether I'm breathing really loud.
So, well, what's your... I know you work in advertising. What's... Like, what do you do? What do you think in terms of promotion-wise podcasters might be doing wrong, or what would you advise when it comes to promoting a podcast?
Oh man, those are so many questions.
I'm going to say and we've got, and go.
I get this question. Actually, Ariel Nissenblatt will tag me in posts when somebody says, "Hey, how do I advertise my podcast on social media?" And it's like, whoa, well, I could go on. I need that Twitter blue 4,000 characters now. To promote your podcast, it really always to promote anything. Let's just
right.
Whether it's podcasting or not, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? And then where are the people that you're trying to interact with? And then how do we engage with those people? It's really what it comes down to every time is who is it? And then how do we get in front of them? What resources do you have to do that? So both from, time resources, social media platforms, monetary resources in terms of advertising. What does your website look like? How, there's so many different pieces to that I think that there's not one answer for everybody. Sorry, look at me hitting the microphone with my hand like a newbie. There are, every single one I address separately. Yesterday, there was a guy who makes a podcast about coaching, and it's a really cool idea. He's got some really good, he lives that life. So he wanted to know how to advertise on social media for that. And, so I started looking into the different, platforms that he's on. He's only on Instagram and on YouTube. And then I asked him, are you looking to get more YouTube subscribers, or are you looking to get more podcast listeners? And I think that his show is only on Spotify for podcasters. And I don't know if he's published it to all the different places. So that would be the first thing that I would recommend. But, it really is it, do you need to start a Facebook page so that you can advertise to coaches in that area? Or LinkedIn, you can definitely find coaches on LinkedIn that you could get your information in front of, but LinkedIn advertising is expensive. So do you have the monetary resources for that? So it's really there's no give $50 to this person and they're going to get you, 200 listeners.
The 10,000, I always picture a giant, it's about 5 feet tall. It's a light switch made of gold. And you just come over and go, and 10,000 downloads instantly. And I'm like, I keep looking for that. It's like Willy Wonka. I'm like, I'm waiting for that golden ticket where you open it up and you're like, 10,000 downloads. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly.
I just played, and I every time I do this, I go, oh, you know what? Here's what I probably should have done. Have you ever played with Buzzsprout ads?
I've looked into them. I have not pulled the trigger on that.
So the first one I did, I was on 221 shows, but some of these were not exactly what I would call a great match. So this time I came back because they added more features, and they said, here are these that I think originally I had 37 because I said I want slightly more male audience because podcasting is slightly more male. And, anybody after 30 to 50, et cetera, et cetera. And so they ended up on 4 shows. But what I wish they did, I had that, is these 4 shows, which was kind of interesting about this is I saw the shows that kind of matched. This was handy in terms of like maybe people I should reach out and network with. So that was kind of interesting. And then here were the 4 that actually said, yes, I will play Dave's ad. And this ad was much better. The first ad I did was horrendous. I listened to because it was all about Dave Jackson. Look at Dave Jackson's been podcasting forever. Dave, and I was like this. So I made it much more about them and are you struggling with a podcast and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And the fun thing was, I think I forget what I paid for this. It wasn't super expensive, but it wasn't super cheap. But I was smart. I used a tool called Switchy, and it's just a kind of a click tracking tool. And I think I got 7 clicks out of 5,000 listens. And I was like, So I what I should have done when I thought about this, if I really wanted to get the most out of this, was I should have found one show that really, really fit my show and just picked that one. So
went all in.
Yeah. And so that those people, I'm trying to figure out where the stop sharing is. Here we go. So that those people would have heard the ad more frequently than in this case. And that's why I emailed Buzzsprout this morning. I said, what would be really cool if I could see, look, first of all, 5,000 impressions is not that much. Most people buy many, many more, but I'm just dipping my toe in the water. But it would have been cool to see was that first show like 4,000 plays and the other one were 500 each or what? And it'd be also, I mean, I have my own little click tracking tool, but it'd be cool if they had one to say, oh, this show delivered X amount of clicks, this show delivered none. So you can kind of know which show is this resonating with. But
were you able to see spikes in your other analytics that maybe people didn't click onto, but maybe they went and searched
and listened? Yeah, I need to. I haven't checked yet. I just did that this morning where I realized that, oh yeah, my campaign's over. So I need to go back and see, did my downloads go up? Or I know Kevin Schmidlin, who does the Grow Your Show podcast, and he said he had a weird thing where his numbers shot up by like 25%. And he said it's weird because it wasn't on a launch day, because normally you get that big spike on that. And he figured out it was when he was on my show, and my show had released. And he said what was cool is he got this big spike, he got a spike. And then he said the big thing was next week, did it go back down to normal? And he said no. He goes, I actually retained some of those people. And so his point was, in terms of regarding advertising on social or things like that, was to advertise where your audience is. And he had a great story. I guess there was some job in the United States that like only 2,000 people do it. It's a really hyper niche show. So somebody got the list of people that do this job, and he sent them a postcard and said, you should listen to the show. Now, I don't know if the guy had a QR code or whatever, but Kevin was saying that in reality, that's probably maybe wasted marketing, because how far away from pressing play are you when you get a postcard? And I was like, that's a pretty decent point. And I know on social media, I always approach social media as the people who are probably following you already probably know you have a podcast. So maybe make the tweet something for them to share to the people who are following them, because they don't know you have a podcast. So,
right.
Is that decent advice?
I would say that's definitely decent advice. The one thing I would say, digital ads, people are getting hit with digital ads constantly. So sometimes, like now, that postcard might actually, if it's in conjunction, like an omni-channel approach to advertising, if you are doing some digital stuff and somebody receives a postcard, let's say they see you on LinkedIn advertising because you've got a very niche job title that you can target, and they receive a postcard, and maybe they saw it on a Facebook ad as well. Now you've got these different touch points where people start to tip to the point of action that sending a postcard can be definitely pricey. So there's just getting creative and going out of the way to do some of these different types of things, I think, and again, it goes back to there's not that big golden switch, and you got to work for it. And I think the other part is really building a community and building that audience, and like what you have here, Dave, on your shows that you have an audience of people who you give advice to, that you listen to, that you have built that trust. So that's a lot easier than when somebody comes here and they see, oh, look, this is a community, I want to be a part of that, versus, hey, listen to my show, hey, listen to my show, hey, listen to my show. And what, there's so much noise and so many people, beating down your door to get you to listen to their thing or buy their thing or join their thing. And I think you really just need to deliver good quality, authentic experiences. And that's the starting point. The rest of the pieces will really depend on who you are and who you're talking to.
Yeah. The other thing we haven't hit on yet, and I just checked it last night and it was like, so it's another thing I have to go back and check my stats now, is, of course, YouTube rolled out, he said in quotation marks, because I am an old curmudgeon, podcasts, which I heard somebody call them YouTube podcasts. Like, But anyway, this is where you go in and you check a playlist to be a podcast. And we were all kind of like, in fact, Bandrew, who is in the chat room, I've always enjoyed his take. And Bandrew does have a question, which is, how is your day going? So far, it's doing great. I got Bandrew Scott in my chat room. I mean, that's great when you got that going on. But, and I always do this. I unstarred his chat, and now I have to go back and find, here, what if I do this? There we go. All right.
Yeah, there you go.
But anyway, so I heard Bandrew say that if you check this and make it a podcast, it will show up in YouTube Music. Don't forget the music part of that. So last night, I've had YouTube Music because I'm a YouTube Red or whatever it is, premium, because I don't want to hear 37 ads, a minute. So I pay for that, but I've never used YouTube Music. I think I might have fired it up once to go, oh, okay. But I listen to music on Pandora if I want to just let it go. And I'm a big Spotify if I want to listen to a certain song now. But I was like, I wonder if they're really in YouTube Music. And I went in and I was like, oh, there they are. There's my stuff. So I need to go make better artwork, because the fun thing was, it was like, hey, make this playlist. And we're like, and what happens? So I don't know if my numbers are going to go up or down or what, but that's one of the results, I guess, of checking that is because when he said that, I was like, is that official? Yeah, of course it is, because it's from Bandrew and he knows everything. So,
right, exactly.
Yeah. So
I've moved all of my podcasts to I've included their podcast playlists on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm seeing, dozens of listens over my full catalog. So
there we go.
Pretty good so far.
Tens of listeners have come over.
Woo. Look at all the listener I have.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll be interested. I know that they're kind of following the same playbook of 2016 when they had Google Play Music and they only rolled it out to the US and blah, blah, blah. But also, go ahead. Google
Plus was the same way. Google Plus, they made all this hype about it, but then they only let certain people in and in the US, and you saw how that flopped, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, because I anything that makes podcasting more popular, I'm all for that. But I'm there is a part of me that's like, yeah, I've seen this movie before. The other thing that kind of happened this week was the Podcast Standards Project is now official. And what was cool about this, if you go to podstandards.org, I was in the room when this happened. And it was one of those where...
The room where it happened. The room where...
But it was kind of like one of those where I walked out, because it was Libsyn, Transistor, Blueberry, Buzzsprout. There might have been another one in there. RSS.com. Can't forget them, because they paid for the meal, which was great. James Cridlin, Todd Cochran, Rob Greenlee. I mean, all these, and we all kind of said, hey, there's all this stuff coming down with podcasting 2.0, all these new features we want to add. Why don't we all kind of sit down and figure out like which one of these should we move first? Because in theory, if we want an app to add a feature, they're going to go, well, let's see how many of these people are putting it into the media host. So if the media hosts come out and say, hey, we've added this new feature for blah, 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 then the apps are much more likely to go, oh, we should probably throw some code on that so that it shows up in our player. And when I walked out, I was talking to Rob Greenlee, Daniel J. Lewis was there, and I was like, I think we just saw history. Like, you know what I mean? It was one of those where it's like, it was kind of like almost like being in the room at the signing of the Declaration of Independence or something like that. I'm like, I think that's actually going to be something. And I was really happy because that was probably close to a year ago. And I've seen many hey, let's get a group of people and we're gonna change the world. And I was like, the longer it didn't show up, I was like, please don't be one of those where like that would have been cool. So I'm happy to hear that they're meeting and they're coming up with stuff. But a great example of this of like, okay, Dave, why is this exciting? If you look at Apple iTunes on a PC or Spotify on a PC, they completely hork your show notes. Just forget about it. They're not going to look like anything you typed. And every app kind of treats your show description kind of differently. So it'd be nice if we could all just say, hey, this is what we're going to do with show descriptions. I'm trying to say show descriptions instead of show notes, although this is a podcast for podcasting, so everybody here knows what show notes are. So it should be interesting to see. It's just one of those like, ooh, this is more than a good idea. It's actually slowly moving. And that's, I think, part of the problem is we always want it to move at the speed of, now, and that doesn't always happen.
Can I bend your ear on something that I'd like to see as part of these pod standards? So you use Podpage. Mm-hmm. I use another service similar to that.
Yeah.
So it takes the 3,000 by 3,000 episode image and brings that into your latest episode. What I'd like to see in the RSS feed is an open graph image, 1200 by 630, a spot for that, so that for all of us who use this and import our RSS feed into a website, that we will have the proper feature image that would be used on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, those different places, automatically, that we can upload at the time that we are creating the podcast episode, instead of, episode goes live, let's say at midnight, and your page is created on your website. Now in the morning when you wake up, you need to go and edit that page in order to add in, and if you're not doing this, you need to be doing this, to add in your social sharing graphic and then save that. And then now you can go and share it on social if you're doing that or wherever. But not everybody, the world is 24 hours wide. So some people might be accessing that early and before you get up and are able to do that, or, maybe you're publishing as soon as you finish your episode. I don't know how many people do that. I think you're a psychopath if you can just go, I'm just kidding, but publishing that right away. But I would say having that social sharing graphic or that open graph image as part of the RSS feed, I think would go a long way to the future of how all of this works in promoting and putting on websites.
What happens if you just have the square image?
It doesn't show appropriately on social. I can probably find an example for that. Actually, this morning I launched an episode of one of my shows as an April Fool's joke and only had the graphic in. So it sometimes it displays different on Twitter, for instance, and on Facebook, or it will like zoom in and expand it, and so everything's cut off and looks not appropriate.
Yeah, or blurry, or
exactly. So
interesting.
And so those open graph sizes are the same for Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, the other smaller ones that are out there these days, Hive.
There's the
Post News, Spoutable. So
that
that they all take that same size, it's a standard, and we've got resources like Podpage, or even like the Libsyn, the page that's auto-generated from Libsyn, or from your other hosts out there. Having that information in there would make the experience better for all podcasters, in my opinion.
There you go. Great idea. I'm not on the board. I was in the room, and I forget who the Libsyn. I think the guy, the person that's the product manager of Libsyn, the hosting part, is on that board. I think Rob Greenlee's still there, even though he's gone indie. But I know Todd, basically Transistor, Buzzsprout, they're all working on this together. And I was like, this would be cool if we can get it to work. And it's nice to see they have a page again. If you go to podstandard.org, you can kind of see there. And there was a button there for like leave feedback. So you might want to go click on that and go, hey, let's get that social share thing going. So because there are some features that are especially the ones that like most people would use. Obviously that makes sense. Let's again, who's my audience? What do they want? Let's give it to them. And some of these things are going to get, pushed through, and some might not because they're hyper niche. We'll see. Or they're just going to be on the bottom of the list. We'll see. But I was excited just to see that it was moving, because I still think, just for years, people were like, we need to dump RSS. And then somebody just went, why don't we just make it better? And I was like, yeah, here's a novel idea. So that should be fun to see. So that was another thing that rolled out this week.
Great.
But keep that in mind, though, just to wrap this up, because the one I see the most of is your show description. See, now I just said the wrong thing. Your episode description. I always say, number one, avoid, if you can, no matter who your host is, typing it in Microsoft Word and copying and pasting, because anytime I have somebody that's like, it doesn't look right, and I go in and I turn on like the text view, the HTML view, you can see if it's been Word, because there's just all this extra weird formatting
style stuff.
And you're like, that's so the first thing I usually do is I cut the description out, and then I think it's Control-Shift-V, because normally Control-V is paste, Control-Shift-V is pasted as text only, and it strips out all the formatting, and then format it in whoever your media host is, because in theory, any formatting they do should be okay, but there are still like iTunes, and that's actually correct. iTunes on a PC that still exists is just going to mess everything up. So
I just thought we just had a bunch of people who haven't updated their computers since 2008. But
well,
it'll show the links, like, it'll say like Fuzz Martin, and then it'll be in parentheses like 15withfuzz.com or something like that. When it displays inappropriately.
Yeah, there is SoundCloud still has not put in features that were introduced by Apple in 2017. So when I hear somebody's using SoundCloud, I'm like, well, I don't know if you know this. And the fact that no advertiser would ever touch a show that's on SoundCloud, because if you want to see why, just go to Google and type in buy SoundCloud plays, because you can get a lot of plays for next to no money. They're not IAB certified. Yeah. Yep. So that's just one of those.
I think the biggest thing to ruin SoundCloud has been TikTok, because all of the people who were, like SoundCloud rappers or SoundCloud music artists are now trying to produce their stuff for TikTok because there's such a bigger reach.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, yes, Chris, SoundCloud, barfing emoji. Agreed.
Exactly. That's just one of those where it's like, is that still around? We mentioned earlier about Clubhouse, like really? And I always, what happens is like Libsyn can automatically post to SoundCloud. But if you have the free SoundCloud account, I think you get 3 hours of free space. And so somebody will say like, hey, I don't see my latest episode. And I'm like, well, you're on the free plan. You're over 3 hours. And I always say, you might want to go over and see exactly how many plays you got on SoundCloud, and then decide, because if you're not going to pay, and why would you, because you already have a media host, you have to take down some episodes. And I'm like, you might want to see how many like plays that episode got, because going in every now and then and deleting a couple episodes to make room for more may not be worth it if you're only getting, 4 plays per episode on a, platform that isn't IAB certified. And that at times is a little, suspect with the whole, I did have was contacted this week by a company that, cutting edge technology, going to promote my show, reach a younger demographic because they were going to make my podcast a reward. So you're playing whatever, Legends of Zelda or insert video game, whatever. And when you, to get to the next level, you have to sit through this podcast. And I was like, no, like my target audience. Now, if I'm doing a video game show, okay, I might be talking to these people, but I emailed back. I'll go, are you the people that were helping iHeart promote this way? And they did not get back to me. So I'm thinking they might be that, but I just was like, yeah, that's not what I would call effective. I
once had an employee who was younger and a little bit greener at what he was doing, but he worked on the digital advertising team. And for one of our larger clients, he forgot to uncheck a box and spent $27,000 on ads running on, it'll last long, ads running on kids apps. So like ABC Mouse and stuff like that.
Right.
And the client came back and said, when it came to reporting time, and he pulled that up and showed it to the client. I didn't have it. I didn't review it before it went out because I wasn't on that team, but ended up, we had to credit them $27,000. So that's, that's those types of reward advertising and all that is just not it.
I just was like, that does not look like a good idea at all in any aspect of that. So awesome. Well, as I look at the clock on the wall, it is time to hit the big green button and start the outro music, which is always great fun. But Fuzz Martin, man, I'm so glad we got to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
In 2 minutes or less, life after Good Morning Podcasters, are we happy that you've... Yeah.
So I doing Good Morning Podcasters was fun, but it felt like work to me, and it didn't feel like, the podcasts that I enjoy doing are my wife's podcast and the Tech Tools for Teachers podcast, and my podcast, 15 Minutes with Fuzz, which again is very hyper local, and feel like I'm actually giving back to my local community with that. I enjoy participating in things like this with you, Dave, and on the Twitter Spaces and in these different kinds of areas where I can lend some of my advertising background. But doing it 3 times a week was just way too much. So, but I appreciate you having me on. Thanks to Jim Collison for letting me steal his seat for the day, where he's off doing whatever he's doing. Hopefully it's fun. And I appreciate it. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. And Fuzz regularly appears on the Podcasting Power Hour, which I also occasionally pop in on. So that's always fun. And on the School of Podcasting this week, I'm interviewing Deidre Shen from Capshow. And we're talking a little like AI and the fact that, she started Capshow and literally like 2 months later, ChatGPT blew up. And so we kind of talk about what do you do when you have competition and how do you survive that and that whole 9 yards. And it's actually pretty interesting. I edited it last night, so that'll be out on Monday, School of Podcasting. We're here every Saturday, 10:30, askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Thanks to the chat room, and we will see you next Saturday. And as far as I know, Jim will be back, but thanks for showing up. Take care, everybody.